It is April 7, 1944, and in the concentration camp at Auschwitz, one of the greatest stories of the Second World War begins to be written. Two imprisoned Slovak Jews, 25-year-old Alfréd Wetzler and 19-year-old Rudolf Vrba, begin their long-prepared attempt to escape from this horrific death factory. This in itself is still nothing extraordinary. There have been hundreds of similar attempts in the camp's history, but Wetzler and Vrba, unlike most others, succeed. What's more, after a 3-week journey to Slovakia, they arrive in Žilina, where they dictate a 32-page report to the shocked Jewish community about the mass murder that has been going on in Auschwitz for 2 years. This text will become one of the most important documents of the 20th century. Since its publication, it was no longer possible to pretend that the world did not know about the extermination concentration camps. And even if the Allies continue to hesitate unjustifiably to act against these atrocities, it is believed that the Wetzler and Vrba report saved the lives of at least 200,000 Hungarian Jews whose deportations were halted after their publication. Alfréd Wetzler, prisoner number 29162, born in 1918 in Trnava. He worked as a laborer in Bratislava, and in 1941 he was imprisoned for 4 months for sabotage. He arrived at Auschwitz by transport from the labor camp in Seredi in April 42. He gradually worked there as a corpse carrier, mortuary attendant, digger or scribe. In a secret resistance group he meets his acquaintance from Trnava, Rudolf Vrba. Rudolf Vrba, by his own name, Walter Rosenberg, prisoner number 44070, born in 1924 in Topolchany. As a Jew, he was expelled from high school, then worked as a laborer. At the age of 17, he decided to escape from Slovakia, but was caught while crossing the border. He was placed in the collection camp in Novaki, and in June 1942 he was sent by transport to Poland. He spent 2 weeks in the Majdanek concentration camp near Lublin, then was sent to Auschwitz. He worked in the warehouse, on slave construction work in the Bunnerwerken factory, and later on the team that sorted the luggage of the victims. He was one of the few who survived being beaten with 50 lashes for smuggling things to another part of the camp. In the last period before his escape, he worked as a note-taker. Wetzler and Vrba begin planning their escape in the second half of 1943. At that time, their perfect knowledge of the camp, information about previous attempts by other prisoners and the support of their resistance group helped them. It may seem strange from today's perspective, but their main motivation is not to save their own lives. They had effectively said goodbye to that many times before, but mainly it is the desire to report to the world what was happening in the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau. They are firmly convinced that when the Allies find out, they will immediately take action against it.
Mojí hlavní pohnutkou, když jsem byl v Osvětimi, byl hněv nad německou drzostí. Ta samozřejmost, s jakou se oni pohybovali mezi umírajícími lidmi zahalenými do bláta krve, moče a výkalů, v bezvadně vyčistěných oblecích a naleštěných čižvách s jezdeckým bičíkem v rukách, tak 100% vědomí své nadřazenosti, že mě to opravdu hněvalo. A já jsem si řekl, já vám vy darebáci ukážu.
Wetzler and Vrba secretly build a kind of bunker under the planks stacked in the places where the new buildings are to be built. It is in a zone behind a fence charged with electricity and barbed wire that encircled the entire camp. About 2 kilometers away, however, there are other guard towers that are basically impossible to get through. However, when all the prisoners working in the zone behind the barbed wire return to the camp for the night, the gunmen withdraw from the towers. If anyone does not return, they are kept on standby for 3 days and the entire zone behind the wire is searched by patrols and dogs. Both young men know they have to stay under the planks for at least 72 hours. Thanks to their contacts in the sorting unit, they got civilian clothes, food, a knife and Russian tobacco for their hideout. the smell of which confused the search dogs. On April 10, 1944, at 6:30 p.m., they finally hear the German orders pulling the sentries down from the watchtowers, and at 10 o'clock they dare to come out. It is the first time they see the camp from the outside. What follows is a 3-week escape through Poland, during which they are lucky many times and are rescued and helped by strangers. They cross the Beskidi Mountains and arrive in Slovak Jelina at the end of April. The fascist Slovak state stopped the deportation of its Jews to concentration camps in October 1942, and at the time of the escape they had not yet resumed. This meant that there were still small Jewish communities living and working in Slovak towns. When the two young men appear out of nowhere in front of Jelina's Jewish community and tell their experiences, everyone is reluctant to believe it. They think it is a provocation. For several days they interrogate them separately, asking them tricky questions, trying to find contradictions in their testimonies. But what both say is practically identical in everything. They know the details and many of the names. In the end they are told to name some of the people from the transports that went to Poland, because it was one of the few things that could be verified. When Wetzler and Vrba started saying names, each from their own transport, those present understood that however incredible it sounded, it was probably true. They wrote a 32-page report, which describes the workings of Auschwitz hell in a very comprehensive way. It is difficult to read even today. The unimaginable horrors are presented in a completely matter-of-fact, as if disinterested manner. One example for all. Our task was to unload the dead, the dying, and the luggage from the carriage. The dead, that is anyone who could not stand on their feet, were put in a pile. A committee from the political section made a selection of about 10% men and 5% women and took them to the camp. The rest was loaded onto trucks and sent to Birkenau, where they were gassed. The dead and dying went directly to the gas chambers. It often happened that small live children were thrown into the trucks with them. The further fate of the Vrba-Wetzler report would be worth a separate story. It was drawn up in 3 copies, which were to travel 3 ways to the Western Allies, but after many peripeties the text arrived in Geneva, Switzerland, only on the 10th of June. There, a representative of the Czechoslovak government in exile got hold of it, and when he discovered that 3,000 Czechoslovaks had been murdered in March, and that the same was now to happen to others who had been brought there by the Nazis 6 months earlier, he roused the British media. On June 15, the BBC broadcast the information, and on June 20, the New York Times picked it up. However, the 6 weeks that elapsed between the writing and publication of the report had a disastrous impact on the Jewish community in Hungary. In mid-May, mass deportations began there, and in most cases the victims were sent immediately to the gas chambers. By the 7th of July, when Horthy's government halted the deportations under pressure from world public opinion, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews had been taken to Auschwitz, 80% of whom never returned home. But even this is not the end. World Jewish organizations and public opinion have now begun to demand that the Allies take action against the incredible killings. They should bomb the gas chambers, crematoria, and railroad access lines. British Prime Minister Churchill himself wrote, "Manim asabashi get all you can there, and if necessary, appeal to me." But nothing happened at all. The Allied command justified this by a number of strategic complications, but the fact is that it was shortly after the D-Day in Normandy, and the supporting defense of their own troops was a clear priority compared to the lives of impoverished Jews somewhere far away in Poland. The concentration camp at Auschwitz was finally liberated at the end of January 1945 by the advancing Red Army. Before leaving, the Germans blew up the gas chambers and crematoria and sent all prisoners who were still able to move to forced labor in the Reich. When the camp was liberated, only 7,000 prisoners, weakened to death, survived in the ruins. This is the bitter epilogue of the Wetzler and Vrba report. Yet their escape and the testimonies they gave were not in vain. The halted deportations of Hungarian Jews saved the lives of an estimated 200,000 people, and the world had to stop pretending that it did not know about Auschwitz. And hopefully the bravery of Alfréd Wetzler and Rudolf Vrba will contribute to ensuring that such a horror will never happen again.